What can life teach us about business?
And what can business teach us about life?
If we succeed in one, do we have to sacrifice the other?
I'm Sarah Armstrong.
And I'm Colt Brenner.
We met in the boardroom working as execs, but we've developed a unique friendship posing these and other philosophical questions to each other.
We bring a passion for continual learning and deep friendships to this podcast that contemplates living elevated lives.
While we have very different life experiences, we're also kindred spirits in the pursuit of knowledge and meaningful personal relationships.
Come with us as we challenge each other and our guests to think differently, be open to new perspectives, and embark on journeys of elevated lives. So, probably the right place to start. Why are we doing this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, great question. And it really is something that we've been talking about for the better part of a year, maybe even longer, honestly.
So, yeah. Yes.
And really started, I think, if memory serves, you correct me, but if memory serves, we just genuinely enjoyed each other's conversation.
Certainly, that's true. Yes.
Yes. And wanted to expand on those conversations and then potentially invite other people in to our conversations to educate us so we can share experiences. And we thought, wow, a podcast would be something we could easily do on two separate coasts because we are very, very, very far apart in the country.
Yes.
And just, put ourselves out there a little bit and hopefully help people on their own personal journeys.
I totally share your thinking on that. I mean, certainly it's been the case for me every time that we converse in a meaningful way, like with enough time to actually get into things that I do find myself personally elevated for having spent that time. I know you and I have talked about this before, really having a sense of, we have different perspectives, but they seem, I think we bring enough openness and sort of just intrigue about what you're thinking on that we find how the blend of the two thinkings can bring us both to a state of elevation. So I certainly have valued all that. And I do. So we've had the opportunity at least a couple times now to share things that we recorded because we thought it might be interesting to record them for other people. And the feedback has been really promising. So people seeming to find, wow, I got a lot out of that conversation. Thank you for sharing it with me. So here we go, rinse and repeat, trying to create more and share more.
Yeah, I think the other thing that has always struck me about our relationship is that we have very, very different backgrounds, very different life experiences. And while those lead us to very different places from time to time, they often lead us to the same place. And I think it's interesting how often our perspective is the same. Even more so than it being different. I mean, it is different and we grow and evolve as we have those dialogues, but we come to the same conclusion a lot, which is very interesting to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. It is interesting how we can take very different routes to a similar conclusion. So probably also valuable for the viewing audience. How did we meet?
I think we met in Denver in a meeting and,
that's right, huh? It was in Denver.
Originally, I was tapped to go into this meeting, didn't really know what I was doing, had very little context. And you happened to be at the table and you met other people that I was with. And so we had a brief encounter there. I don't know that either one of us made that much impression on the other at that particular moment. But then you joined the organization that I was with as their chief marketing officer. And we became fast friends after that. Yeah,
it was funny. During that whole chapter, I every time I was in the executive boardroom, so to speak, the C-suite, I just always felt like, why am I here? How did I get here? These people, it's something about, I don't know, I had this impression of like a chief marketing officer doesn't really deserve to be here or something about that. Just like these people are all getting the job done and I'm just telling other people about the job they're getting done. Why do I get to be here? It just always felt, I don't know. So, and I remember that one time when I actually showed up to one of the C-suite, that's the ELT, the executive leadership team meeting in flip-flops. I was called out for that, but I also stood my ground.
Yeah.
Do you remember that day?
I do remember that day. Yes. And it was interesting because I didn't know you very well when
Mm,
we started attending those meetings together.
yes.
And me having an operator's mindset, right? I'm very execution focused and, let's get a plan and figure out who's going to do the things and
Yeah.
how long is it going to take to do the things.
Yeah.
And you, of course, don't really operate, your brain does not operate in that way at all. And so we were it was good complementary skill sets, but you really helped, I would say, solidify
Mm,
my concept of how important a personal board of directors is. I had that concept before I met you,
hmm.
but our interactions over that period of time really solidified that for me,
Yep.
because there would be 8 people in the room and 7 people were kind of thinking mostly the same thing. And then you would come out of left field with, but what about this? And
Huh.
everybody would kind of stop and go, huh. And sometimes, we didn't necessarily all jive with that, but a
Sure.
lot of times it took the conversation in a very positive and different direction. And it really solidified for me the importance of that diversity of thought.
So I dig this. And a second ago, you said the phrase, which I think is going to be an oft repeated phrase for us, the personal board of directors. And this has been in our conversation now for the better part of a year. But I don't think my instinct is that the personal board of directors as a concept hadn't been something new for you in the last couple of years. This has been with you for a long time. Maybe the phrase personal board of directors is something you came up with to name a thing that's been a part of your life for a long time. But tell me more about where that came from.
Yeah, I've had it. I've used the phrase for probably 8, 9 years.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
it's,
Okay.
yeah, personally,
Yeah.
it stemmed from, I had an amazing mentor whom you've met, Rob.
Yep. Sure.
I had a great mentor, and I really grew and developed under
Hmm.
his tutelage.
Yeah.
And as I continued to grow and develop, there were places that I wanted to go that he couldn't take me. It just wasn't. It wasn't who he was. It wasn't an experience that he had. It just really wasn't necessarily how his brain worked.
Yeah.
And so I started having people in my life that could kind of take me down certain paths that I wanted to explore. And that kind of created the personal board of directors for me. It really became very important. The more, I would say, the higher I got in my career, the more
Hmm.
senior my title was in an organization, to have those people in my life that could challenge me to think differently. And also sometimes tap me on the shoulder and be like, let's check yourself before you wreck yourself, because
Uh-huh.
everybody needs those people.
Yeah.
And it's something that I have really found to be so fulfilling in my life. And then I've gone on, interestingly enough, I've gone on to do talks about a
Right.
variety of things, and the personal board of directors concept has been as a part of those talks, and it's the one thing that the audience always asks the most questions about. So I feel like it's something that resonates with people,
Yeah.
and I look forward to exploring it. And really, in my mind, our podcast is kind of the podcast of having a personal board of directors, because you and I are going to serve in that role for each other, but we're going to invite other
Yep.
people
Yes.
that serve in that role for us into this podcast.
Okay. So you have like colleagues, friends, family members, people who've been close to you in your life, and they've been there the whole time. Many of them could potentially play that role. They could be part of your personal board of directors. So I just want to kind of get your thoughts on, like, what's the difference, right? You've been talking with these people for a long time. Is there some sort of intent that you bring to the conversation, a way that you approach it, how often you talk to them? What is it that changes a person who you've been talking to for 20 years into one of your personal board of directors? Or is it the same thing and you're just calling them something else? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that people serve different roles in your life. And my philosophy is that sometimes the people closest to us are not good board members.
Okay.
Because we need them to comfort us. They could be great cheerleaders, but we need them to kind of lift us up when maybe we're not having a great day.
Uh-huh.
And I also think that there's a level of intimacy, certainly in your romantic partners, that may not be conducive to that constant push-pull and challenging type dialogue that a personal board of directors member would serve. So
Okay. I want to unpack that later, but go on.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know that it necessarily changes, but I do think that as the relationship grows and evolves and your level of trust and intimacy grows, you start to get more and more comfortable asking for specific things or talking at a much deeper level with someone.
Okay. So I wonder if part of this to kind of get people oriented around this is to first recognize that there are people who can play different roles that are meaningful roles. Do you have is there a prescribed inventory of roles that you recommend a person kind of build their board for, or is it just super personal kind of a thing?
I think it's personal because I think everybody wants different things out of life. And so how you organize your board should be conducive to achieving those goals.
Okay.
So if you need more, and they can be practical or philosophical or whatever. So if you need someone that helps advise you from financial matters, as an example, there could be a friend that you have that is much more gifted in that space than you are and has the time and the patience that you can, kind of lay out, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here's some details about my finances that maybe you wouldn't share with other people. So that's just an example. I tend to have people on my board that are much more philosophical than tactical, just because that is the area that I like to flex my muscle the most.
Okay. I'm super interested in exactly what that means, but I want to ask a different question before that. So you have people who have knowledge, maybe philosophical thinking and whatever that are present in your life. They're around you. You've had access to them for a long time. I think I will say from my own personal experience, directly my experience, that I do have a hang up that I run into relative to calling somebody up and saying, I want to pick your brain about something, right? There's like this intimidation about maybe it's asking for a favor or something like that. Put them out maybe in some way. I personally find it very fulfilling and rewarding when somebody asks me about an area that they're looking to pick my brain. It's like, yeah, totally. Like, when do you have time? That's sort of, I just, it's very eager sort of jump in, but also a difficult time translating that to a sense that they would feel that way. Do you have, is that similar at all to your own experience?
Yes. Okay. Although I've gotten much, much better at it as I've gotten older.
Great. That's what I was hoping you'd say.
Yeah. And again, the relationship that you have with people, I am fascinated at what thoughts and feelings we project on others that have no basis in fact.
Totally. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And once you do it a couple of times and you realize that most people feel the way that you feel, that they want to help. If they care about you, why would they not want to help you? Like, if you feel like this person doesn't want to help you, then maybe they're not the right board member.
No, totally. That makes sense. Yeah.
But I do think that the more I do it, the easier it gets. And I enjoy it when people do it in the other direction. And it's not necessarily sometimes I can think of a couple people. There are people on my board that it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
So I call and ask them, they call and ask me. Right. It's a two-way street. There are other people on my board that don't ever call and ask me for anything. And whether that is because I don't offer them something that they're looking for, or maybe that's just not where they are in their journey, that they're seeking out counsel in that way. But it's different for everyone.
Okay. And do you ever have more than one on the phone at the same time? Because a board you would have in a meeting like once a quarter.
Right. I'm trying to think if that's ever happened. No. Okay. I can't think of a time that I've had two people. I am a good dot connector. So when I really like someone, I want everyone else to really like them too. And so I tend to make introductions and So in that way, I think I build relationships amongst my board members from time to time, but it's not like Sarah calls a board member and everybody dials in. Like that's not how that that's not how that works.
No, I
But
get
I
you.
will say, as people maybe get to know each other, I may call another board member and say, "Hey, I was talking to Colt and this is his thinking and this is my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think of those two
I
reactions?"
get
Just
you,
to
yeah.
get kind of a third viewpoint.
Okay, I dig that. So, I mean, our goal is going to be to find individuals that we think bring insights, thoughts, direction, guidance, etc. Maybe just fresh perspectives that, for us, can be sort of temporary or board member emeritus or whatever you want to call that, in a singular conversation. Really, just trying to bring more ideas and perspectives and guidance for people to elevate their own lives. And at least the list that we've already generated draws individuals from a huge variety of circumstances and backgrounds and influence and all that. One thing that I said I wanted to unpack with you that you mentioned earlier is there are, I don't know if I want to put words in your mouth here, with maybe you said something about limits, or there's some things that a close romantic partner can't be. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, first, let me say that may be unique to me. Everyone's romantic relationships are unique to them, and those dynamics are so deeply personal. Mm-hmm. So, first of all, I would never say that just because I think that, everyone should think that too. However, I firmly believe that one person cannot be everything to anyone. I think that's unrealistic expectations and sets everyone up for disappointment. So my husband and I, we obviously are very close. We talk about a lot of things. But when it comes to, I want to learn or explore something new and interesting, that's really not the role that he serves in my life. Sometimes I'll go explore that with somebody else and then bring that back to him and say, "Hey, this is what I learned."
Yeah.
But he doesn't necessarily lead and guide me in that way. He leads and guides me in other ways.
Sure.
But that's just not the role that he serves for me. And I think that that's by design, because these conversations tend to make people uncomfortable. And my husband anyway, I mean, that he's where I go for comfort. And so like, there's that conflict between I'm intentionally trying to be uncomfortable, so I wouldn't look to the person that gives me comfort to make me uncomfortable.
Wow. Yes, I see so much in what you just said. And I absolutely share your thinking. As you mentioned earlier, you hesitated to kind of project on every other romantic relationship. I'm not going to hesitate. I think it's absolute folly to say that a single partner needs to be your everything, needs to be your philosophical equal, needs to be, I mean, like, there's so many things that we have come to romanticize a relationship in a romantic context can and should be. And then when it fails to be all 100 of the 100 things, that you have a problem. I think it's indicative of kind of a cultural disease almost that we suffer from, that we're meant to stand ourselves up and our family up as an island, and we're very isolated. We don't have that kind of family connections that we used to have. We don't have tribal connections that we used to have. Community connections are also, I think we're increasingly detached, but we haven't really called it out that that's what's going on, only because we've elevated so much this idea of independence and personal capacity and self-reliance. So as those things become placed on the pedestal, this idea that we're suffering from a disconnect from everything that could be benefiting us, is just sort of like, well, that just means you're not doing it well. I mean, I totally think it's the opposite. I think that we need to look at the fact that this idealization or this adoration of independence has cost us something. And now we need to look proactively at how do we replace what we've lost in that process. And I think that this personal board of directors is a great way to approach that. So thank you for illuminating that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I want to just go one step further and say, I think that in my marriage, if I'm struggling with
Mm-hmm.
something, which is
Mm-hmm.
typically when you are seeking guidance from your board of directors, whatever you're struggling with,
Yeah.
when I'm struggling with something, my husband has an emotional reaction to the fact that I am struggling.
Oh,
And
yeah, sure.
so, right. So there, because that's his role, right? He's my protector and all those things. And so he immediately wants to fix the struggle. Whereas my board of directors comes at it from a, well, let's think about this differently.
Mm-hmm.
How are you maybe contributing to your own suffering?
Mm-hmm.
The in a less emotionally charged way. And so I think that that helps me stay calm and focused on how do I navigate my way through a particular situation
Yeah.
versus just being emotional about the fact that I'm struggling with something.
Okay, so I know I'm catching you out of the blue on this one, but now I'm super curious. So I know this goes both ways for you. You have people on your personal board of directors, and you have served as a director on other people's boards, although they may not have called you that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so without too much specifics, whatever that's required, can you, in the recent past, can you talk about an instance where you were on someone's board and offering them perspective, and what happened in that situation?
Yeah. Sure. I can think of a person who was struggling in a particular work situation.
Yeah.
It was an experience they were having in their job,
Yeah.
and they were emotionally reacting to the situation, and to the point that they were going to make a knee-jerk reaction, like, I'm just going to quit and I'm going to go do this other thing, or I'm just going to quit and not even have another thing lined out. I'm mad and I'm just going to quit.
Yeah.
And I got a text late one night. Are you awake? And
Yeah.
oh, okay. So we hopped on the phone, and I remember, and this has been a while ago, but I remember saying, okay, what outcome are you trying to accomplish? So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I think that's a very important question. What is the right outcome for you in this situation? And then focusing people on the outcome and then walking their way backwards. Ultimately, that person did not quit their job.
Huh.
And the next day, slept on it. The next day said, I'm still kind of peeved about it. I'm going to have one more sleep on it, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But ultimately did not leave their job, and I think came about how to address what was causing them the consternation to start with how can I resolve this conflict versus just I'm out. And I think that there's, for that particular person, there was value in learning conflict resolution skills and managing your emotions for a period of time that allowed you to see, okay, I need to solve for this.
Yeah. Yeah. I have
Is
found
that what you were looking for? Is that kind of?
no, that is exactly what I was looking for. So now the next question is, so I want to flip this, rather than from seeking people who could be part of your board of directors, is when you are sought, do you have guidance for people who I don't know, first of all, how to recognize when you've been sought, as like, sure, you get the text at whatever time at night, are you awake? I'm being sought, right? So like, what are some of the clues around what that looks like, number one? And then number two, what have been some of the tactics or techniques you brought into those conversations so that you're effective in the role when you're sought?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say, to take the first part of that question, you're being sought when people call you when they're vulnerable.
Wow. Great.
In my
Yes.
opinion.
Yes.
So whether they have the presence of mind to know what they're seeking from you, but when they're vulnerable or raw, that you should recognize that as you're being sought.
Yeah.
And with that is, I mean, again, I find that extremely complimentary. And I love that I have relationships with people that call me when
Yes.
they are feeling raw and vulnerable. But then I take that as a responsibility to make sure that I treat that outreach with the proper respect.
Okay.
And care.
So I know you're heading into the next thing, but before you head into the next thing, I just have this instinct to say, I want to go a little deeper right here, because I have only, like, recently, and I'm talking about the last 2 or 3 years, gotten from literal ground zero of like emotional intelligence to half an inch off the ground, just with a few different tools. I think that you know, the public education is doing nothing for us in this regard. And especially men are just Neanderthals when it comes to this kinds of stuff. So someone's coming to you vulnerably. Give me the clues. I mean, just, I know I'm making it sound like, give it to me like I'm an 8-year-old, but most men are emotional 8-year-olds. So anyone who disagrees, let's go ahead and have that conversation later.
The clues are, I would say, they're worked up.
Okay.
They may have a raised tone of voice.
Okay.
Irrationality is what I would see is a big clue, because that means that the emotional
Men
part of
can
their brain
spot that.
is right. Is like, I can't.
Yes.
And victim, like if they're using language like they're being victimized in some way, someone's doing something to them.
Yes,
that is an indicator that they are in a raw and emotional place.
Oh, I really appreciate you breaking that down, because I can totally spot that. The alarm bell that I have and the radar that it's attached to, both very sensitive. This person's being irrational. So now there's this like 2-step where that I can connect that to. That means they're being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm being sought. And now that totally changes the way that I can lean into this conversation. So thank you. Go on to the next part.
Yeah. Cause I mean, we should write that down and circle back to that, because if that's something that people don't really acknowledge, that truly is a brain reaction, right? Your brain chemicals, your emotional sections of your brain are wreaking havoc on the rest of your brain, right? And so there's all of these things which we could talk about another time, but we should circle back to that.
Sure. Okay, great. So now the belt, now you have checked the box. I've been sought. How are you effective there?
So I think a couple things. One that I try to always keep in mind is that influence is a gift and should not be wielded with carelessly. Let me say it that way.
Wow. Yeah, sure. Yes.
Influence should not be wielded carelessly. So the first thing I have to do is check my own thoughts and emotions on whatever this person is bringing to me, and making sure that I'm not bringing my baggage into this conversation. It's my job to keep all my emotional luggage outside of that conversation, or call it out and say, I'm thinking about it in this way, but here's why. And you may not agree with this thinking because you may not have had this experience or whatever. Yeah. So one is, proceed with caution and check your emotional baggage. And then the third thing that I think I've already mentioned is really focus on that outcome. What are you trying to accomplish? And then work your way from where they are to where they want to be. Because it's rarely 1 or 2 steps. It's like 10, right?
Yeah.
So that would be my 2 things.
Yeah. That way, what I love both of those. The second one in particular, I'm just thinking about, to make sure that you've anchored the conversation around the outcome that matters to them. Because I can see in myself when I have this instinct on the outcome that would be good, right? And it's like, kind of that's part of the baggage, is having a sense of the outcome that would be good for the person, but to just leave that at the door and start with a conversation about, well, what is the outcome? What's the end point that you're trying to reach here? And let's talk about how to reverse engineer that destination for you. I think that's super valuable. Another thing that I've come to see more and more is it really is impossible to invent the circumstance for a person that is the good, the correct, the right circumstance. You need to leave that up to them, because in so many cases where you'd have this sense of, this is the best outcome for this person, you just cannot possibly know how their life is going to unfold. Even if that exact thing comes to pass, how the next thing from that thing will flow or manifest in their life even when you get to 3 or 4 factors, it becomes impossible to predict, and life has trillions of factors. So it is not possible to be accurate in projecting what is good, correct, right, best for a person. Leave that to them, and take your thoughts out of it. I've encapsulated this thinking, and I think we've talked about this. Maybe we talked about this before. I have this story that I tell about about a heroin addict, which is just an invented story, and it has two paths. So you imagine this idea of an addict, and they have close family and friends, right? People who have the capacity to intervene in this person's life. They recognize the problem. They seek to intervene. They have the meeting, and the individual is moved to discontinue, right? And they do. But life happens, right? As life does. And drugs have been a crutch for this individual. And let's say maybe 6 months later, they kind of get back on that path and they go even deeper and further and more dangerously into that path just because it's been their crutch. And now they're sort of like careening into it. Again, just thinking about like how a novelist would write, maybe we'll have the intervention one more time. And there's a lot of like ultimatums now. And the person decides to change course again and cleans up, whatever. But again, life happens. And then finally the person goes so far into it that they overdose and die. All right. You have another version of this story where there is no intervention. This person just kind of continues down the path until they do code, medically code, but they're brought back from that. And it's their actual own death that brings them to, this can't ever happen again. It's not about what these people think. It's not about my friends and family. It's not about some value system. It's about just, I have to stop doing this or I'm going to die. And the only way to get to that level of realization is to die, right? I mean, you look at this and you go, well, which one is the better path? The person who, had the intervention lived maybe 2 years from the time that their friends identified and had the first intervention. But the person who coded out, literally died, and was, revived medically somehow, whatever, got caught by medics in time, lived another 30 years. You can't know.
Yeah, you can't know. And I mean, that's obviously, that happens to people that, even though that's a made up story,
yes.
That there are people in that scenario all day long.
All day.
And I don't, I just am very fortunate that those are not decisions that I currently have to be faced with. I think the thing that, to kind of bring us back to the board of directors and the role that we play in each other's lives is you can only be in control of you. That's all you can do. And so you can't see around the corner. You have no idea how other people are going to behave, what's around their particular corners. And so when I'm guiding people through those types of conversations, it's bringing them back to, but what can you do? What are you in control of? You are in control of your thoughts, your actions, your decisions. And I think that people tend to forget that and they want to control what everybody else, they try to control what everybody else is doing. But really, to me, recognizing that you are in control of your thoughts. You're in control of how you react to certain situations. You're in control of your guardrails. You're in control of your definition of success, right? So all of those things are unique and completely up to you. And so pushing people to think down those paths versus, what someone else is thinking and doing, I think is a far more productive conversation.
I absolutely agree with that. Okay, so you have introduced us to the board of directors, which is really what I was hoping we would accomplish in this conversation. There's another thing that I'm hoping that we can do in each episode, which is to suggest an action, right? Like one thing, just a little bit of a takeaway that a person, if they wanted to like, okay, I want to listen to Elevate. And when I listen to Elevate, I want to elevate. So, I mean, there may be people who have already come up with instincts. They have folks they want to reach out to, this idea of a person board of directors. They've got great intuitions and they're already in motion. They've been texting people while they listen. But just to kind of break down one action, right? Like what is your guidance on a one action to take from this episode?
I mean, it could be very tactical to reach out to someone as you just described.
Yeah.
However, I'd like to go back a little bit and a little higher level and say that my one action that I would recommend is for people to figure out who they want to be. So to me, you can't put together a board of directors until you figure out who is the better version of yourself that you're aspiring to be on the other side of this conversation. And so I know you and I've had some conversation about purpose, and I'd love to start to go down that path, because if you are reaching out to the wrong people, you're going to end up in the wrong place. So to me, it's okay. You want to go on this journey of elevation. Deciding just to go on the journey is step one.
Yes.
But then step two is, what does that look like? What are you aspiring to be? When people think about you, and I love my Stephen Covey 7 Habits book. I go back to that. But when you think about, begin with the end in mind.
Yes.
And what do you want people to say about you and to think about you and the influence that you have on their life?
Okay.
Start there and then work your way backwards.
So was that, I don't want to beat it up, but was that 3 questions? What do you want people to say about you? So again, I just want to put like some kind of a rigor around it. Is there 3 questions that you want people to answer on paper? Is there some kind of a matrix that would describe how, that gives me a parameter, a framework rather, to articulate who I want to be? Is there something that you can prescribe?
Yeah. Okay. So I want to answer that this way.
Okay.
The question is, who do you want to be to other people? That's the question, right?
Okay.
And so I'm going to ask you, like, there is a reason that you and I became friends and you wanted to do this podcast with me.
Yeah.
And not the rest of your friends, because you got a ton of them and they're all super cool people. And I've met several of them. So when I think about who do I want to be to Colt Briner?
Yeah.
There are answers to that question that led us to today.
Sure.
So that's the context of, who do you want to be to other people? That's the question I would encourage people to ask.
Now I wonder, so I don't want to force this. I just want to ask your opinion about this. This phrase was recently brought back to my attention this week. Something about you should think of yourself as becoming the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right?
Yeah. So
first of all, just what's your initial reaction to that statement in the context of what we're talking about right now?
I agree and disagree at the same time.
Okay.
And I agree in that we are human and we are easily influenced by outside forces. Sure. I think that is absolutely unequivocally a true statement.
Yes.
I think that statement is oversimplified.
Of course.
Yeah. And leads people to believe that it just all miraculously happens, as though they have no intention behind it. And when I think about the people that I spend the most time with.
Well said. Yes. Okay. Totally. Yes.
I mean, sometimes those aren't people that I intend to spend that much time with, right? It's somebody that I'm working alongside. That doesn't necessarily, I want to be open to all of their influence.
Yeah.
So
the way that hit me, it was actually, so if you're interested in aspects of your life looking like the average of some group of 5 people that you have admiration of or aspire to be like in those regards, it isn't just that you went to the movies with these people. It isn't just that you spent time. It isn't just that you're in conversation, but to bring some actual intention to the way that you spend time with them is necessary. Is it, am I getting that correctly? Yeah.
That's exactly right. So I think 5 is too low a number, but anyway, go ahead.
Okay. I agree with both of those things. And then, then the last thing I want to just kind of poke around this particular is, as a member of someone else's 5, how do you bring yourself, right? I think that's the, you have to think about the fact that if you wish for the influence of 5 people to, I know it's super oversimplified, but roughly elevate you through just the mathematics of averages, great. You need to bring yourself into that with intention. If you are in someone else's 5, or again, too small a number, fine, oversimplified, etc. What are the ways that you can be effective in that role?
So to me, there's there needs to be a conversation, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so one of the reasons why you and I are as close as we are is because we don't assume anything. We ask, right?
Yeah. Yes, I've
And
asked a
so,
lot.
yeah. So if you have somebody in your life, instead of just trying to guess what it is they're looking to you for,
Mm-hmm.
maybe ask them, how can I be the best friend, the best mentor, the best board member? What is it about me that I can make sure that I bring to this relationship that is going to benefit you the most? Like, why can we just
Totally.
not ask each other that question?
So we had to look at the Simon Sinek approach to this. You went through that exercise yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious, is there some part of that that you want to recite as you found it valuable, or anything else just in terms of guidance for our audience relative to that?
The thing
Because you
that
just
struck
said
me,
it, right? You just
I
started
did.
those sentences. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. The thing that struck me about that entire exercise is I was someone different to all of those people.
Wow. Okay.
None of
Wow.
the answers were the same. None of them.
Okay.
And I had people that I had worked with as a peer. I had people that I had been their boss. I had people that I'd been friends with for 10, 15 years. I mean, just a variety of people, and all of their answers were different.
Yeah. And they were basically the same questions that can you give them one more time?
Yeah. Let's see. It was, why are we friends?
Uh-huh.
What about me is, what are some characteristics that I bring to our relationship that you find valuable?
Yeah.
And is there, I think the other question that I asked is there something about me that you don't see frequently in other people?
Oh, okay.
So one answer, just to kind of be fun, but I talked to someone that I previously worked with, and he was the only person that said your sense of humor. Nobody else thinks I'm funny. Nobody thinks I'm funny. But he's like, it's your sense of humor, because we could just collapse in laughter at the drop of a hat. But he's the only person that sees me that way. It's very interesting. You probably know who that is.
I do know who that is. So, okay. So but the last thing on that was that if you kept pressing, because people they just they'll respond in some ways, and it's, oh, he's just a good friend. It's like, well, what does that mean? And you keep going until you do kind of get them to that. I don't know. I just really appreciate what happens in me when X and Y and Z, when they stop talking about you and start talking about them, then you know what it is that you're actually bringing to their life. Right. So I don't know. Did you press to that point, and did you find any commonality, or what happened at that stage?
I mean, I definitely had to get people to give me specific examples. Can you give me a memory where you had a particular feeling, whatever that is? Because again, it was different for everyone. There were a couple people that the one commonality was when I had served as a leader for them. Those people had similar answers around, I made them feel safe. They could, bring me ideas. A couple people said that, I didn't give them the answers. I gave them the problem and some guardrails and let them come up with the answers themselves.
Yeah.
And they felt like that created energy in them and things like that. But, it was a very interesting exercise. I highly recommend it. I think it was really fun to do. And
we'll put the link to that.
Yeah, we should.
The link in
that's really smart.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
Really smart.
So let me see if I can sum this up well enough. So the idea of the what, the how, the why of elevating one's own life, and that it's possible, and that doing it often and looking at it and asking these questions. This is a dimension of living that is fascinating to both you and I. I think that you and I have a lot to offer to this conversation, but more than that, we're interested in fostering the dialogue with others, to hear from other people. How are they doing this? What works? What doesn't work? Where have you run into pitfalls, etc.? So I love the idea that you and I can bring the different perspectives, the different questions, and sort of continue to bring in voices from people who can contribute their thoughts to this dialogue, because whatever I can do to help to elevate others feels rewarding and fulfilling to me. Yes, it's like a very selfish thing. It's a very selfish thing to elevate others. So that's kind of what I see as we're up to here with this podcast. Do you agree with that summary?
I agree with that summary. I think that we have been so personally fulfilled and we just want to share it. And if more people can feel as uplifted and encouraged and peaceful, then I feel like our work here is done. I mean, that's awesome. That's all we're really looking for.
Bitchin'. Okay. Well, I'm going to call this a well-recorded podcast. We'll do the thing with editing as that may be necessary, but we'll get this one published. I'll include any links as I listen through it if we've referred to things that might be relevant, so everybody has a chance to kind of just click through and explore what we want to point them towards.
That sounds great.
Okay. Well, then, any other closing thoughts from you?
No, other than, well, yes, I do. Not a closing thought, but a closing question, because you took the role of interviewer.
You noticed that?
Primarily in this podcast. And so you kept me on my toes by firing questions, very thought-provoking questions at me. But let me come back to you and say, what did you learn about yourself when you did the Simon Sinek exercise? And what has been most meaningful for you that you want to carry forward to a larger audience?
People feel valued. People find that they weren't aware of how much value they had in themselves before they talked to me. And then after they talked to me, they believe in themselves more. They find that they had maybe not given themselves credit for really cool things that they do, or really great things that they are, and capacities that they possess that have value in dimensions that they haven't even considered. Was kind of the mutual thread. Certainly a lot of different things and a lot of difference as you continue to drill down. It becomes like the upside down pyramid until you find that there is a place where most people kind of settle on. And although not everyone used the same words, I think it would be fair to say that that's where they all generally arrived.
Excellent. And what about our relationship or this concept of board of directors have you found fulfilling that makes you want to share it with more people?
Well, I mean, anything that can reverse or offset this, what I will even call a desperate isolation that we've created in our culture, I think is massively beneficial. Every time I lean into this kind of dialogue, the exercise of building a board of directors, I mean, I believe in the premise of the average of 5 thing, even though, it's just super oversimplified, and enormous value in people, a universe within each one, and just keep exploring, right? I remember, what did Randy say? He said, he was talking about just people who get bored and who were just like, I'm so bored. And he was like, we were just out looking at nature. And he said, it took the universe over 14 billion years to create all of this, and you're bored? I was like, oh, yes. And then within each person, even so much to explore. So it's just so damn fulfilling, so rewarding to create these exchanges, the opportunities to share and be shared with. So I'm super excited to keep going.
All right. Well, I think we can end on that note.
Let's do that.
All right.
And then the cool music plays and we're good. Let me stop the recording.